You have no right to be here, my stepson Dylan hissed at my husband's funeral, his words slashing through my heart like ice. For years, I'd built a life with Bruce, nurturing our Vermont farm, only for Dylan and his cunning ally Chloe to call me a fraud, a nobody in my own marriage. What they didn't know was my secret. Bruce's recordings, tucked in his study, exposing their vile lies. This is how I turned their betrayal into my triumph, fighting for my home. How did I unravel their deceit? Keep watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If this story's grabbing you, hit that like button to let us know. Tell us where you're tuning in from. I stood in the dim light of the small Vermont church, the scent of lilies heavy in the air, clinging to my skin like grief itself. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of loss, of Bruce, my husband, my anchor. The wooden pews creaked under the mourners' shifting weight, their whispers a low hum like bees circling a wound. Why did this feel wrong? Why did the air taste bitter, like betrayal waiting to strike? I clutched the edge of my shawl, trying to anchor myself to the moment, but my eyes kept drifting to the coffin at the front, where Bruce lay silent, forever. Then Dylan strode in, my stepson, all sharp suit and sharper eyes. 38, running a shady real estate startup, he'd never called me family, not once. His presence alone tightened my chest, but it was the woman beside him who made my heart stutter. Chloe, he said her name was, her smile too polished, her perfume sharp like a warning. She stood too close to Dylan, her hand on his arm, claiming space in a room that wasn't hers. I didn't know her, but the way she looked at me, like I was an intruder at my own husband's funeral, made my skin crawl. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dylan's voice cut through the murmurs, cold and commanding. He stood at the pulpit, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on me. "I need to set something straight. Joanna," he pointed, his finger a blade, "has no right to be here. She was my father's wife on paper, nothing more. Chloe," he gestured to the woman beside him, "was his true love, for years." The room gasped, a collective inhale that sucked the air from my lungs. My knees buckled, but I gripped the pew, refusing to fall. Chloe's lips curled, her eyes glinting with something cruel, triumphant. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat, tangled in shock. True love? Bruce and I had built a life together. Our farm, our quiet evenings, our promises. Had it all been a lie? My fingers brushed the gold band on my left hand, still warm from habit, and I felt a crack in my heart widen. Dylan wasn't done. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking on the wooden floor, and handed me a folded letter. "This is from Dad's lawyer," he said, his voice low, almost a hiss. "The house belongs to me. You've got 3 days to pack up and leave." His words hit like a slap, sharp and stinging. I unfolded the paper, my hands shaking so badly the words blurred. Legal jargon, signatures, a demand to vacate. My home, our home, the farm where Bruce and I had planted roses, where we'd laughed under the stars. Was this really his will? I remembered a moment years ago when Bruce and I stood in our garden, the earth soft under our feet, his hands rough but gentle as he handed me a rose. "This is ours, Joe," he'd said, his voice warm like the summer sun. "No one can take it away." Had he known then? Had he seen this coming? The memory felt like a lifeline, but it slipped through my fingers as Dylan's smirk burned into me. The church seemed to close in, the stained glass windows casting fractured light across my face, like my world breaking apart. The mourner's eyes bored into me, some pitying, some curious, none daring to speak. I wanted to run, to hide, but something in me stirred, a spark of defiance. If Dylan thought he could erase me, he was wrong. I'd find the truth. But where would I even start? Why did I give so much to a family that never truly accepted me? The question gnawed at me as I sat in the kitchen of our Vermont farm, the letter from Dylan's lawyer still crumpled in my coat pocket. The air smelled of cedar and old coffee, the kind Bruce used to brew every morning, its bitter warmth now just a memory. The wooden table beneath my fingers was worn smooth from years of shared meals, late-night talks, and promises we thought would last forever. Outside, the wind whispered through the fields, carrying the faint scent of hay, but it couldn't drown out the echo of Dylan's words at the funeral. "You have no right." My chest tightened, and I pressed my palm against it, trying to steady my breath. Had I been blind all these years, pouring my heart into a life that was never mine? I closed my eyes, and the past came rushing back. It was 15 years ago when I left Boston, my teaching career, my old life, to start over with Bruce in Vermont. I could still feel the weight of that decision, the way my hands ached as I packed up my city apartment, the scent of cardboard boxes mixing with the sharp tang of cleaning spray. I'd sold my home, a cozy brownstone filled with books and memories, to fund this farm, to give Bruce and Dylan a fresh start. Bruce had been so grateful, his calloused hands cupping my face as he whispered, "You're saving us, Joe." I'd believed him, believed in the life we'd build together. But Dylan? Even then, at 23, he'd looked at me with cold eyes, his jaw tight, as if my presence was an intrusion. I remembered one evening sitting at this very table, helping Dylan with his college applications. The room was warm, lit by a single lamp, the air thick with the smell of ink and paper. "You don't have to do this," he'd said, his voice flat, pushing away the forms I'd spent hours preparing. "I'm not your kid." His words stung, sharp as a winter gust, but I smiled through it, telling myself he was just young, just grieving his mother. I kept trying, paying for his textbooks, driving him to campus visits, even when he barely acknowledged me. My fingers curled around the edge of the table now, the wood cool against my skin, as I wondered if I'd been a fool to think love could bridge that gap. The sacrifices didn't stop there. I poured everything into this farm, my savings, my energy, my dreams. I could still hear the creak of the barn door as I worked alongside Bruce, my hands blistered from hauling hay, my clothes damp with sweat. We'd laugh through the exhaustion, his deep chuckle a balm to my tired bones. "We're building something real," he'd say, his breath warm against my ear as we stood in the twilight, the sky painted gold and pink. Those moments felt like home, like proof that my sacrifices were worth it. But Dylan grew more distant with every year, his visits to the farm rare, his calls curt. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his eyes narrowed, as if calculating what I'd taken from him. One memory stood out, sharp and vivid. It was a winter night, the kind where the cold seeped through the walls and the fire in the hearth barely kept it at bay. Bruce and I sat on the couch, wrapped in a quilt, his arm heavy around my shoulders. "Dylan's struggling," he'd said, his voice low, tinged with worry. "His business, it's not what he says it is." I'd pressed him for details, but he shook his head, his fingers tightening on mine. "Just promise me you'll be careful, Joe." The crackle of the fire filled the silence, and I felt a chill that wasn't from the cold. What had Bruce known? Why hadn't he told me more? Now, sitting alone in the kitchen, I traced the grain of the table, my fingers catching on a rough patch where Dylan had once carved his initials as a teenager. The memory made my throat tighten, not with fondness, but with a growing unease. I'd noticed things over the years, late-night calls Dylan took outside, his voice hushed, the way he'd bristle when I asked about his work, the strangers who'd show up at the farm, their eyes darting, their smiles too tight. I'd brushed it off, telling myself it was his life, his choices. But had I ignored the signs? Had I been so focused on being the perfect stepmother that I'd missed the truth? What kind of person betrays the only family they have left? The question burned in my mind as I sat in Bruce's study, the air thick with the musty scent of old books and dust. The lawyer's letter lay on the desk, its crisp edges mocking me. My fingers traced the paper, the ink smudging slightly under my touch, as if it could erase the words demanding I leave my home. Dylan's voice from the funeral echoed in my ears, sharp and cruel, calling me a stranger in my own life. But it was Chloe's smug smile, her perfume lingering like a threat that made my stomach churn. Who was she, really, and why was Dylan so eager to destroy me? I'd come to the study seeking answers, the room a shrine to Bruce's quiet hours. The desk was cluttered with papers, a chipped coffee mug, and his old tape recorder, its buttons worn from use. The light filtering through the window was dim, casting long shadows across the floorboards, each one feeling like a finger pointing to secrets I hadn't dared to uncover. I picked up the letter again, my eyes scanning the cold legal terms. Sole heir, it called Dylan, as if I'd never existed. My hands shook, not just from anger, but from a creeping doubt. Had Bruce lied to me? Had our life together been a facade? I remembered a night, maybe a year ago, when Bruce sat in this very chair, his brow furrowed as he scribbled notes. The room smelled of whiskey and candle wax, the flicker of light catching the worry in his eyes. "Chloe's back," he'd said, his voice low, almost a growl. "She's trouble, Joe. Always has been." I'd pressed him, my hand on his arm, but he'd brushed it off, saying it was old history. I'd trusted him, believed it was nothing. Now that memory felt like a warning I'd ignored, the weight of it pressing against my chest. I confronted Dylan the next morning. He stood in the living room, his suit pristine, his posture rigid like he owned the place. The air was heavy with the scent of rain from an open window, the curtains fluttering like nervous ghosts. "This is my father's house," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You were just temporary." Temporary. The word hit like a fist, my breath catching as I gripped the back of a chair. "Bruce loved me," I shot back, my voice trembling but firm. "We built this life together. You can't erase that." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and leaned closer, his breath sour with coffee. "You're delusional, Joanna. Chloe was his real love. You were just convenient." My heart pounded, my palms clammy against the wood. I wanted to scream, to shake him, but his certainty unnerved me. Was he telling the truth? Had Bruce kept secrets so deep they'd unravel everything? I thought of the farm, the roses we'd planted, the nights we'd spent planning our future. Could it all have been a lie? Dylan's eyes gleamed with triumph, as if he sensed my doubt, and he turned to leave, his shoes clicking on the hardwood. 3 days, he called over his shoulder. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That evening, Chloe arrived. The doorbell's chime cut through the quiet, sharp and jarring. She stood in the doorway, her red coat stark against the gray dusk, her perfume overwhelming, floral but with an edge, like something rotting beneath the sweetness. "Joanna," she said, her voice smooth, almost pitying. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Bruce and we were everything to each other." She stepped closer, her heels clicking, her eyes locked on mine like a predator sizing up prey. "He wanted me here, not you." My blood boiled, my fists clenching at my sides. "Get out," I whispered, my voice shaking with rage. She only smiled, that same cruel curve from the funeral, and left without another word. I returned to the study, my hands trembling as I rummaged through Bruce's things. The air felt heavier now, the shadows deeper, as if the room itself held its breath. My fingers brushed something cold and metallic, a USB drive tucked inside a drawer next to the old tape recorder. My heart skipped, the faint hum of the device buzzing in my ears as I plugged it into Bruce's ancient laptop. The screen flickered, casting a blue glow across my face, and I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. What would I find? Would it save me, or shatter me completely? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. Could a single recording hold the key to saving everything I'd fought for? The question pulsed in my mind as I sat in Bruce's study, the USB drive cold in my hand, its weight heavier than it should have been. The room was quiet, save for the faint creak of the house settling, the air thick with the scent of old paper and the ghost of Bruce's cologne. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum, urging me to act. Dylan's threat, 3 days to leave my home, loomed like a storm cloud, and Chloe's smug voice still rang in my ears, taunting me. but Bruce's voice, crackling through the tape recorder last night, had sparked something in me. Hope. He'd known about Chloe's schemes, Dylan's betrayal. He'd left me a weapon, but would it be enough? I pressed play again, the laptop's glow casting jagged shadows across the desk. Bruce's voice filled the room, steady but urgent. Joe, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and Chloe's back. She's after the money, the farm, everything. I recorded her threats. The USB has it all. There's a fund, Joe, in your name. It's yours, no matter what Dylan says. My breath caught, tears pricking my eyes as I clutched the USB tighter. The fund, our savings, my old Boston home's proceeds, was mine? I remembered Bruce's late nights here, his furrowed brow as he sorted papers, the clink of his whiskey glass. I'll protect you, he'd promised once, his hand warm on mine, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Had this been his plan all along? I needed help. Alone, I was no match for Dylan's lawyers or Chloe's lies. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, the room's chill seeping into my bones. I thought of Tom, our neighbor, a retired financial crimes officer who'd always waved from his porch, his coffee steaming in the Vermont dawn. His eyes were kind but sharp, like he'd seen too much to be fooled. I grabbed the USB and the recorder, my hands trembling, and headed to his house. The morning air was crisp, smelling of dew and pine, the gravel crunching under my boots as I walked the short path. My pulse thrummed, a mix of fear and resolve. Could Tom make sense of this? Could he help me fight back? Tom welcomed me into his small living room, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the faint tang of wood smoke. Papers littered his coffee table, and a police badge sat on a shelf, glinting in the morning light. "Joanna, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice steady but concerned. I poured out the story, Dylan's betrayal, Chloe's claims, the letter, the USB. My words tumbled over each other, my hands gesturing wildly, the recorder heavy in my lap. Tom listened, his eyes narrowing as I played Bruce's recording. "She called me last month," Bruce's voice said, crackling with anger. "Demanded half the farm or she'd ruin us. Dylan's in on it, Joe. He's been skimming from my accounts." My stomach twisted, the room tilting slightly as Tom paused the tape, his jaw tight. "This is serious," Tom said, leaning forward, his calloused fingers tapping the table. "Chloe's got a history. Fraud, maybe worse. And Dylan's startup? It's a front. I've seen the signs before." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me from the fog of doubt. We spent hours poring over the USB's files, recordings of Chloe's threats, bank statements showing Dylan's transfers. The numbers blurred before my eyes, the paper rough under my fingertips, but Tom's calm focus grounded me. "We take this to court," he said, his voice firm. "The evidence is solid. You've got a case." My heart leapt, a flicker of hope igniting. But court? The thought of facing Dylan and Chloe in public, their lies exposed, made my palms sweat. Could I do this? I practiced my testimony that night, standing in front of the mirror in Bruce's study. The glass reflected my tired eyes, the lines etched deeper by grief and betrayal. My voice shook as I recounted the recordings, the threats, the fund Bruce had hidden for me. "You're stronger than you know," he'd told me once, his hand brushing my cheek as we stood in our garden, the scent of roses thick in the air. I clung to that memory, letting it steady me. But as I spoke, the phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the silence. Dylan's name flashed on the screen and my stomach dropped. "You're making a mistake," he said when I answered, his voice low, menacing. "Drop this or you'll regret it." The line went dead, leaving only the hum of the empty house and the thud of my heart. Would the truth be enough to reclaim my home, my life, from those who'd stolen so much? The question clung to me as I stood outside the Vermont courthouse, the morning air sharp with the scent of frost and wet stone. My hands gripped the folder of evidence, Bruce's recordings, the USB, bank statements, its weight grounding me against the churn in my stomach. The courthouse loomed, its gray facade stark under the pale sun, and I could still hear Dylan's voice from his late-night call, cold and threatening. "You'll regret this." My breath caught, the memory of his words like a blade against my skin. But I'd come too far to turn back. Today I'd face him and Chloe, armed with Bruce's truth. Would it be enough to make them pay? Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, the benches creaking as I sat, Tom at my side. His steady presence, the faint scent of his aftershave, calmed my racing pulse. I'd spent nights preparing, my voice trembling as I rehearsed in Bruce's study, the USB's files looping in my ears. I remembered one evening, months before he died, when Bruce pulled me close in our kitchen, the warmth of his arms a shield against the world. "You're tougher than you think, Joe," he'd said, his voice rough with love, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. That memory fueled me now, pushing back the fear as the judge called the case. Dylan sat across the room, his suit crisp, his jaw tight. Chloe was beside him, her red lipstick stark, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. I clutched the folder, my fingers brushing the worn edges, and stood when my name was called. "Mrs. Fields," the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "present your evidence." I took a breath, the air heavy with anticipation, and began. "My husband left recordings," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They prove Chloe tried to extort him, and Dylan helped her." I handed the USB to the bailiff, my hands steady despite the tremor in my chest. The courtroom speakers crackled as Bruce's voice filled the space, raw and urgent. "Chloe demanded half the farm," he said in the recording, his words sharp with anger. "She threatened to ruin us. Dylan's in on it. He's been moving money through his company." Gasps rippled through the room, the air electric with shock. I glanced at Dylan, his face pale, his hands clenched on the table. Chloe shifted, her nails tapping, her composure cracking. I played another file, a phone call where she hissed, "You owe me, Bruce. Give me what's mine or I'll take it all." My heart pounded, the sound of her voice like nails on a chalkboard, but I stood taller, feeling Bruce's strength beside me. Dylan's lawyer leapt up, his voice loud, accusing. "This is fabricated!" he shouted, his words clipped, desperate. "Mrs. Fields is grasping at straws to steal my client's inheritance." I flinched, the accusation stinging, but Tom leaned close, whispering, "Stay strong, Joe." I met the lawyer's glare, my voice rising. "These are Bruce's words, his truth. I lived for him, for this family, and I won't let you twist that." The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling like dust. The judge's eyes softened, and I felt a spark of hope, bright and fierce. The trial stretched on, hours blurring into moments. Tom presented documents, bank records showing Dylan's illicit transfers, Chloe's forged signatures. The evidence was airtight, thanks to his expertise. I remembered his words at his house, the clink of coffee mugs as we planned. "We've got them, Joe. The law's on your side." Now, as the judge reviewed the files, the room pulsed with tension, the air thick as if holding its breath. Dylan's eyes met mine, no longer smug but hollow, defeated. Chloe's hands twisted in her lap, her earlier confidence gone. Finally, the judge spoke, her gavel poised. "Based on the evidence, Chloe Bennett is guilty of fraud and extortion. Dylan Fields, you face charges for money laundering." The gavel struck, a sharp crack that echoed like victory. The room erupted, murmurs swelling, but I barely heard them. Relief flooded me, warm and overwhelming, like sunlight breaking through clouds. I stood, my legs trembling, and saw Chloe cuffed, her face pale, the clink of metal harsh in the silence. Dylan slumped, his head bowed, the fight drained from him. If you're cheering for my victory, smash that like button. What do you think about this moment of justice? Let us know in the comments. What does it mean to rebuild after losing so much? I sat by the window of our Vermont farm, the morning sun spilling across the wooden floor, its warmth kissing my skin like a quiet promise. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the sterile courtroom I'd left behind. My hands rested on a cup of tea, the ceramic warm, the steam curling like a whisper of peace. The farm was mine now, the funds secured, Dylan and Chloe's schemes undone, but the victory felt bittersweet, heavy with the weight of betrayal. I'd fought for this place, for Bruce's legacy, but what had I learned about myself? The question lingered, soft but insistent, as I gazed at the fields where we'd once planted roses together. I closed my eyes and the memory of the funeral flooded back, the church's heavy air, the sting of Dylan's words, "You have no right," and Chloe's cruel smile. I could still feel the cold pew beneath me, the way my heart had cracked under their accusations. That moment had nearly broken me, but it also woke something inside, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd been a teacher, a wife, a stepmother who tried too hard, but never a fighter. Not until they forced me to be. The thought warmed me, like the sun on my face, and I realized I wasn't just reclaiming the farm, I was reclaiming myself. Later that day, I walked to Tom's house, the gravel crunching under my boots, the air crisp with the scent of pine. His porch was cluttered with potted plants, their leaves brushing my arm as I knocked. He opened the door, his smile kind but weathered, like the badge on his shelf. "Joanna, you did it," he said, his voice warm, steady. "You stood up to them." I nodded, my throat tight, and managed a quiet, "Couldn't have done it without you." We sat on his porch, the creak of the swing soothing, and I thanked him, my words heavy with gratitude. "You reminded me I'm not alone," I said, the words catching as I felt the truth of them. He waved it off, but his eyes softened, and I felt a connection, a reminder that community could heal what family had broken. Back at the farm, I wandered the fields, the grass tickling my ankles, the air alive with the hum of bees and distant birdsong. I stopped by the rose garden, its blooms vibrant under the sun, and knelt, my fingers sinking into the cool earth. This was where Bruce and I had dreamed, where he'd promised me forever. I'd lost him, but I hadn't lost this. Not the land, not the memories, not the strength I'd found. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, and felt a quiet power settle in my chest. I wasn't just Joanna, the grieving widow. I was Joanna, the woman who'd fought and won. That strength pushed me to act. I started a book club for older women in town, gathering them in the farm's living room, the air filled with the scent of old books and fresh coffee. Their laughter echoed, bright and warm, as we read stories of resilience, of women who'd faced betrayal and risen stronger. "You're an inspiration, Jo," one woman said, her voice soft, her eyes bright with tears. I smiled, my heart swelling, but inside I wondered if I was strong enough to keep going, to build something new from the ashes of my past. Then came Dylan's letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, the paper smelling faintly of ink, its edges worn as if he'd hesitated before sending it. "I'm sorry," he wrote, his words scrawled in a hurry. "I was wrong, Joanna. I let Chloe manipulate me." I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, the ticking of the clock loud in the silence. I wanted to forgive him, to erase the pain of his betrayal, but the memory of his cruelty at the funeral, his cold demand to leave, held me back. I folded the letter, my fingers lingering on its creases, and set it aside. Forgiveness might come, but not yet, not when the wounds were still raw. What lesson did you take away from my journey? Share it in the comments. If this story inspired you, share it with a friend who needs to hear it. What do you hold on to when the dust of betrayal settles? I stood outside our Vermont farm, the evening air cool against my skin, carrying the sweet scent of roses and damp earth. The sky glowed soft pink, the kind of sunset Bruce and I used to watch together, our hands entwined, the world quiet except for the rustle of leaves. The farm was mine now, secured by truth and tenacity, but the victory felt like a fragile gift, wrapped in the scars of Dylan's cruelty and Chloe's lies. I'd fought for this place, for my dignity, but what had I learned? The question lingered as I gazed at the fields, their gentle sway a reminder of the life I'd reclaimed. I thought back to the courtroom, the echo of the gavel, the weight of justice settling like sunlight after a storm. I could still hear the crack of Chloe's cuffs, see Dylan's bowed head, his arrogance shattered. That moment had freed me, but it was the journey, the pain, the doubt, the strength I found that shaped me. I walked to the porch, the boards creaking under my boots, and joined the women from my book club, their laughter spilling into the dusk. "Joanna, you've given us courage," one said, her voice warm, her hand squeezing mine. The air smelled of coffee and old books, their pages rustling as we shared stories of survival. "No one can take your strength," I told them, my voice steady, echoing the lesson I'd learned. Resilience and truth are armor against betrayal. Inside, I felt a quiet pride, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The farm's familiar creaks, the warmth of the hearth, wrapped around me like Bruce's embrace. I remembered his words, spoken years ago in this very room, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You're my home, Joe." That truth had carried me through the darkest days, and now it lit my path forward. I'd keep hosting these gatherings, helping women like me find their voice, their power. The future stretched before me, open and bright, like the fields under the morning sun. Don't miss more stories like this. Hit that subscribe button now. If this story moved you, share it with someone who'd love it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.